Good evening and welcome back to Whisper of Road. Tonight we set off on a chilling journey down America's most haunted highways, bringing you 5 true trucker horror stories. Forever change the way you see those empty ribbons of asphalt. These accounts come straight from the logbooks and first-hand testimonies of long-haul drivers who, on the most remote roads in the country, encountered something beyond explanation. From the phantom hitchhikers of Interstate 80 to the time-warping loops of US 50, each story documents a direct encounter with forces that still patrol America's highways long after midnight. And these aren't campfire tales traded over truck stop coffee. They're verified incidents backed by dashcam footage, CB radio recordings, and official reports that trucking companies would rather keep buried. What makes them especially unsettling is the consistency of these accounts, spanning decades and thousands of miles, hinting that some roads never truly rest. If you're new here, subscribe to Whisper of Road for daily true horror stories that explore the darkest mysteries hiding in plain sight. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the moment we pull back the curtain on America's most terrifying secrets. Now buckle up. We're heading onto the highways where reality begins to break down and the impossible becomes inevitable. Story 1. The National Weather Service had issued no warnings for Interstate 80 that particular night. Clear skies stretched infinitely overhead, the vast Nevada desert, with visibility officially reported at over 10 miles, and ambient temperatures maintaining a steady, comfortable 62 degrees Fahrenheit. For Marcus Rodriguez, a 34-year-old seasoned veteran of America's extensive highway network, boasting 12 years of perfectly spotless driving records, it should have been nothing more than another entirely routine run from Salt Lake City to Reno. His 2018 Peterbilt 579, meticulously maintained and thoroughly equipped with every conceivable safety feature his enterprise could afford, hummed consistently along the familiar stretch of paved road. He had traversed this exact route more than 200 times. Marcus had consistently prided himself on his meticulous preparation. His logbook entries were legendary among dispatchers for their exceptional precision, diligently noting every detail from exact fuel consumption rates to intricate weather patterns. That specific October night, he had precisely logged his departure from the Salt Lake terminal at exactly 9:47 p.m., his trailer heavily loaded with valuable electronics destined for California. The route was indelibly burned into his muscle memory. Interstate 80 west through the Nevada desert, past Wendover, across the Salt Flats, and ultimately into the Sierra Nevada mountains. He was intimately familiar with every truck stop, every way station, and every single mile marker between the states of Utah and California. At 11:43 p.m., a full 4 minutes ahead of his projected schedule, Marcus passed mile marker 45 near the small, secluded desert town of Hawk. The highway stretched out before him like a gleaming ribbon of black glass, illuminated solely by his powerful LED headlights, cutting sharply through the profound darkness. His CB radio crackled intermittently with distant chatter from other drivers, but for the most part, he found himself utterly alone with his thoughts and the steady, rhythmic thrumming of his diesel engine. That is precisely when he first observed her. At exactly 11:47 p.m., according to his truck's precise digital clock, an elderly woman materialized in his headlights near mile marker 48. She stood distinctly on the shoulder of the highway, one arm deliberately raised in the universal gesture for assistance, her other hand tightly clutching what appeared to be a small suitcase. Marcus felt his heart rate suddenly spike as he decisively applied the brakes, the massive truck's air brakes audibly hissing as he expertly brought 18 tons of steel and cargo to a perfectly controlled stop roughly 50 yards past her position. Marcus had previously picked up stranded motorists before, although his company's policies strictly discouraged such actions. But there was something uniquely different about this particular woman that instantly struck him. She appeared to be in her 70s, adorned in a cream-colored dress that seemed oddly formal for standing beside a desert highway at midnight. Her gray hair was impeccably styled, defying the fact that she should have been completely windblown from standing exposed beside the interstate. As he slowly climbed down from his cab and approached her, he noticed that she cast no shadow despite the powerful beam of his headlights. "Thank you for stopping, dear," she uttered, her voice possessing an unusual clarity that seemed to effortlessly cut through the profound desert silence. "I have been waiting for such an extraordinarily long time." Her accent was subtly European, possibly German, and when she offered a smile, Marcus observed that her teeth were perfectly white and remarkably straight, an unusual characteristic for someone of her apparent advanced age. "What precisely happened to your car, ma'am?" Marcus inquired, his gaze sweeping the roadside for any discernible signs of a broken-down vehicle. There was nothing, he noted to himself. No car, no truck, no motorcycle, just empty desert stretching boundlessly in all directions. "Oh, there was an accident," she replied, subtly adjusting her grip on the suitcase. "Such a truly terrible accident, but that was long ago. I desperately need to get to Reno to see my daughter. She will be so terribly worried." The woman's eyes possessed an odd quality, seeming to reflect light in a manner similar to an animal's, although Marcus initially attributed this to the specific angle of his headlights. Despite every safety protocol vehemently screaming against it, Marcus found himself inexplicably agreeing to offer her a ride. Something about her overall demeanor, her undeniable distress, overrode his usual professional caution. He gently helped her up into the passenger seat of his cab, noting that her hand felt unusually cold despite the otherwise warm desert air. She weighed almost nothing, as if she were composed of air rather than solid flesh and bone. As they smoothly pulled back onto the highway, the woman began to speak extensively about Reno, describing streets and specific buildings with remarkable, almost photographic detail. She casually mentioned the Old Mapes Hotel, which had been closed since 2000, as if it were still fully operating. She also spoke of taking the train to visit her daughter, even though passenger rail service to Reno had been definitively discontinued decades earlier. Marcus found her stories charming, if a bit confusing, and charitably attributed her apparent time displacement to her age and the stress resulting from whatever accident had left her stranded. 20 miles later, at mile marker 68, she abruptly pointed toward the right side of the highway. "You need to slow down here, dear. There's black ice ahead just past that curve. Very dangerous for a big truck like yours." Marcus quickly glanced at his temperature gauge. It registered 64 degrees Fahrenheit, far too warm for any ice formation. But something in her voice, a new urgency that had not been present before, compelled him to ease off the accelerator regardless. "Ma'am, it is genuinely too warm for ice tonight," he gently stated, wishing not to directly contradict her, but feeling the distinct need to explain the sheer impossibility of her warning. "No, dear," she insisted, her voice now carrying a strange, unsettling echo. "Trust me, I have witnessed what tragically happens when drivers fail to listen." As she spoke these final words, Marcus glanced toward his passenger seat and felt his blood instantly turn to ice water in his veins. The seat was completely empty. The elderly woman had vanished entirely, leaving behind only the faintest lingering scent of old-fashioned perfume and a small, inexplicably wet spot on the seat where she had been sitting moments before. Marcus slammed on his brakes, his mind reeling in profound disbelief. He had been actively speaking to her mere seconds prior. She could not have simply disappeared from a moving truck cab 60 feet above the ground. He pulled over immediately, meticulously searching every single inch of his cab with a powerful flashlight. Nothing. There was no sign whatsoever that anyone had ever been there, except for that peculiar damp spot on the passenger seat and the lingering scent of lilacs. Shaken but resolutely determined to reach his destination, Marcus pulled back onto the highway. As he cautiously approached the curve she had warned him about, his headlights suddenly revealed something that made his hands tremble uncontrollably on the steering wheel. A thin sheet of black ice covered the asphalt for nearly a quarter mile, completely invisible until his light hit it at precisely the right angle. At the speed he had been traveling, his heavily loaded truck would have immediately jackknifed, almost certainly sending him over the embankment and into the desolate desert below. He navigated the ice with extreme care, his truck's traction control system engaging multiple times as his wheels desperately fought for grip on the treacherous surface. Once safely past the hazard, he grabbed his CB radio with shaking hands. Breaker 19. This is Desert Runner eastbound at mile marker 70. Be advised, there's black ice on the westbound side just past the curve. Repeat, black ice on westbound Interstate 80 at mile marker 69. The responses came immediately. Thanks for the heads up, Desert Runner. How did you manage to spot it in this weather? Inquired a driver heading west. Marcus paused, genuinely unsure how to explain what had occurred without sounding completely insane. Just got lucky, I guess, he replied, though luck seemed an utterly inadequate explanation for his supernatural passenger. Marcus successfully completed his run to Reno without any further incident, but he could not shake the profound memory of the elderly woman. The next morning, while his truck was being unloaded, he visited the Nevada Highway Patrol office and meticulously described his encounter. The desk sergeant, a weathered man named Patterson, who had worked the I-80 corridor for 15 years, listened with growing, intense interest. What exactly did she look like? Patterson inquired, pulling out a thick file folder. Marcus described the woman in vivid detail. Her cream-colored dress, her perfectly styled gray hair, her slight European accent, and her persistent obsession with visiting her daughter in Reno. Patterson nodded slowly and then produced a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1987. The headline starkly read, "Elderly woman dies in I-80 accident near Hawk." The accompanying photograph clearly showed the exact same woman Marcus had picked up, down to the identical cream-colored dress and small suitcase. According to the article, Eleanor Hoffman, age 73, had been killed instantly when her 1983 Buick sedan hit black ice and tragically rolled over near mile marker 48. She had been traveling to Reno to visit her daughter when the accident occurred. She appears every few years, Patterson explained, always near mile marker 48, always warning drivers about hazardous conditions ahead. We have had at least a dozen reports over the years, all describing the same woman wearing the same dress. Some drivers initially think she is just a confused hitchhiker until she mysteriously vanishes from their cab. Others never see her at all. Patterson showed Marcus photographs of the accident site from 1987. The twisted wreckage of Eleanor's Buick was scattered across the very same stretch of highway where Marcus had miraculously found black ice the night before. The strange thing is, Patterson continued, she only appears when there truly is genuine danger ahead. Every driver who has reported seeing her was saved from some kind of imminent hazard: black ice, washouts, drunk drivers, mechanical failures. It's as if she is still desperately trying to complete that last trip to see her daughter. Marcus left the highway patrol office with a profound sense of unease, profoundly mixed with immense gratitude. He had been saved by a ghost, protected by a woman who had tragically died attempting to make the very same journey he completed every single week. Over the following months, he began to research Eleanor Hoffman's story more thoroughly. He discovered that her daughter Margaret had waited at the Reno bus station for 3 days after the accident, utterly unaware her mother had perished. Eleanor had been carrying Christmas presents in her suitcase, gifts she never got to deliver. The trucking community, typically highly skeptical of supernatural claims, began to take notice when Marcus openly shared his story. Other drivers came forward with remarkably similar experiences on the same stretch of highway. A distinct pattern emerged. Eleanor appeared only to drivers who were in genuine danger, and only when weather conditions created the very same black ice that had tragically killed her. She never spoke of her own death, never acknowledged her ghostly state, but continued her eternal journey to Reno, perpetually helping others avoid her unfortunate fate. Marcus commissioned a small memorial stone to be reverently placed near mile marker 48, with Eleanor's name and the simple, poignant inscription, "A guardian angel of the highway." The memorial quickly became an unofficial shrine where truckers would regularly leave flowers, coffee, and small tokens of profound respect. Drivers from various transport companies began reporting unusual experiences near the site, CB radios crackling with inexplicable warnings in a distinct woman's voice, mysterious figures flagging them down only to vanish without a trace, and an inexplicable, powerful urge to slow down and meticulously check their surroundings. The Nevada Department of Transportation, initially skeptical of these persistent reports, eventually acknowledged the Eleanor Hoffman phenomenon in their safety briefings. They installed additional warning signs near mile marker 48 and significantly increased winter maintenance in the area. The stretch of highway where she died remarkably became one of the safest sections of Interstate 80, not through advanced technology or increased enforcement, but through the enduring, protective presence of a woman who steadfastly refused to let her final journey end in tragedy. Today, veteran drivers still recount the tale of Eleanor Hoffman, the phantom hitchhiker of Interstate 80, to newcomers. They consistently advise listening carefully to elderly passengers who suddenly appear in the Nevada desert, especially those who mention traveling to see family. "She saved my life," Marcus often tells other drivers at Traveler's Oasis rest stops along his route. And she is still out there, still trying to get home, still diligently making sure others make it safely, too. The Highway Patrol file on Eleanor Hoffman remains open, not as an unsolved case, but as a poignant testament to the enduring bonds between the living and the departed on America's most isolated roads. Her story serves as a profound reminder that some journeys transcend death itself, and that the highways that meticulously connect our nation are traversed by far more than just the living. Story 2. According to his precise fuel log, Jake Morrison should have been in Denver by sunrise. The meticulous record that had rigorously defined his 15-year career as an owner-operator showed a full tank of diesel purchased at 11:30 p.m. in Pueblo, enough fuel for the 120-mile run to his destination with 40 gallons to spare. His GPS unit displayed an estimated arrival time of 4:45 a.m., carefully accounting for anticipated construction delays and his self-imposed speed limits. But when the sun majestically crested the Rocky Mountains that October morning, Jake Morrison was still driving the exact same stretch of U.S. Highway 50. He had entered a bewildering 6 hours earlier. His fuel gauge was reading nearly empty, and his odometer displayed an impossible 847 additional miles. on what should have been a perfectly routine overnight haul. Jake Morrison was not a man predisposed to confusion or error. At 41 years old, he had meticulously built his reputation on unwavering precision and absolute reliability, consistently earning lucrative contracts with companies that demanded both punctuality and meticulous documentation. His 2019 Kenworth W900L was comprehensively equipped with every conceivable tracking device and monitoring system available, from electronic logging devices that precisely recorded his every movement to dash cameras that captured both the road ahead and his reactions behind the wheel. He maintained incredibly detailed paper logs as a backup, diligently noting fuel consumption, prevailing weather conditions, and road hazards with the thoroughness of a scientist conducting a complex experiment. That night commenced like hundreds of others. Jake departed the Travelers Oasis rest stop in Pueblo at exactly 11:47 p.m., his trailer loaded with precision machine parts destined for a manufacturing plant in Denver. U.S. Highway 50 West stretched out before him, a familiar ribbon of asphalt he had traveled more than 300 times over the course of his distinguished career. The route was indelibly burned into his muscle memory, past the Colorado State Fairgrounds, through Fowler and Manzanola, then northwest toward Colorado Springs before seamlessly connecting to Interstate 25 north into Denver. The night was clear and distinctly cold, with temperatures hovering near freezing and absolutely no precipitation in the forecast. Traffic was light, consisting mainly of other commercial vehicles undertaking their overnight runs. Jake settled into his usual comfortable rhythm, cruise control precisely set at exactly 67 miles per hour, CB radio accurately tuned to channel 19 for traffic updates, and his favorite country music station providing a soothing background noise for the journey ahead. At 12:23 a.m., Jake smoothly passed through the small town of Rocky Ford, meticulously noting the time and location in his logbook. As strictly required by company protocol, the town's main street was completely deserted, save for a few pickup trucks conspicuously parked outside a 24-hour diner. Their drivers were probably grabbing a quick coffee before continuing their own late-night journeys. Nothing seemed unusual or particularly noteworthy about the familiar landmarks. The towering grain elevator rising majestically against the star-filled sky. The railroad crossing that invariably required a careful, measured approach. The prominent billboard advertising a local auto dealer that had seemingly been there for as long as Jake had been driving this specific route. 20 minutes later, at 12:43 a.m., Jake passed through Rocky Ford again. The bewildering realization did not immediately hit him. Long-haul drivers often develop a form of highway hypnosis, a state where familiar routes become mere background noise to their deeply ingrained thoughts. Jake initially attributed the repeated sighting to either acute fatigue or simple inattention. Perhaps he had just passed another small Colorado town with remarkably similar features, but when he carefully checked his GPS unit, the display clearly showed his exact location as Rocky Ford, Colorado, at mile marker 43 on U.S. Highway 50 West, the identical coordinates he had meticulously logged 20 minutes earlier. Jake pulled over at the next wide spot on the shoulder and meticulously examined his equipment. His GPS unit displayed no error messages. Its satellite connection remained robust, with accuracy readings of plus or minus 3 feet. His odometer had advanced by exactly 20.7 miles since his last Rocky Ford sighting, precisely the distance he would expect to travel at his recorded speed over that specific time period. Yet somehow, impossibly, he was in the exact same location he had been before, gazing at the same diner, the identical grain elevator, and the very same billboard advertising trucks he would never require. Attributing the anomaly to a GPS malfunction, Jake then consulted his detailed paper road atlas, a habit that had unfailingly saved him from electronic failures countless times over the course of his career. According to the map, US Highway 50 West ran in a perfectly straight line through Rocky Ford toward La Junta, with no discernible loops, circles, or alternate routes that could possibly explain his apparent displacement. He traced the route with his finger, confirming that the highway continued northwest in a direct, unwavering path toward his intended destination. Jake resumed driving, now paying considerably closer attention to landmarks and mile markers. He passed the Rocky Ford city limit sign at 12:51 a.m., meticulously noting the exact time in his logbook. The grain elevator receded in his mirrors as expected, and the familiar sequence of rural landmarks steadily rolled past his windshield. An abandoned farmhouse featuring a distinctive red barn, a concrete bridge spanning an irrigation canal, and a cluster of mailboxes at a dirt road intersection that locals use to access their properties. At 1:11 a.m., Jake saw the abandoned farmhouse with the distinctive red barn approaching in his headlights. This time, there was no mistaking what was undeniably happening. Jake had meticulously memorized every single detail of that farmhouse during his previous passage. The way the barn door hung askew, the specific pattern of broken windows in the main structure, the old water tower leaning at a precarious angle behind the buildings. These were not merely similar buildings in another location. These were the exact same structures he had observed 20 minutes earlier, despite having driven continuously in a straight line for the intervening period. Jake grabbed his CB radio with hands that had undeniably begun to shake. Breaker 19, this is Jake Morrison running westbound on Highway 50. Can any drivers out there confirm your location for me? The radio crackled with static before a familiar voice responded. This is Desert Rose eastbound on 50. Just passed through La Junta about 10 minutes ago. Where are you at, Jake? The voice belonged to Maria Santos, a driver Jake had known for years, who ran regular routes between Kansas and Colorado. I think I'm stuck in some kind of loop near Rocky Ford, Jake replied, fully realizing how utterly insane the words sounded, even as he spoke them. I keep passing the same landmarks over and over. Have you ever heard of anything like this happening? The CB remained silent for nearly a minute before Maria's voice returned, now sounding genuinely concerned. Jake, are you feeling okay? Maybe you should pull over and get some rest. These overnight runs can mess with your head sometimes. But Jake knew with absolute certainty that this was not fatigue or hallucination. His truck systems were functioning entirely normally. His mind was clear and perfectly alert, and the physical evidence of his bizarre situation was undeniably real. He began meticulously documenting everything with obsessive detail, timestamps for every landmark, photographs of his GPS display, and voice recordings vividly describing each anomaly. If this was some kind of breakdown, at least there would be concrete evidence for investigators to meticulously examine. At 1:31 a.m., Jake passed through Rocky Ford for the third perplexing time. The town looked exactly as it had during his previous passages, down to the precise arrangement of pickup trucks outside the diner and the burned-out streetlight near the railroad crossing. But this time, Jake noticed something that sent a profound chill to his very bones. His own truck appeared in the diner's parking lot, a perfect duplicate of his Kenworth W90L, complete with his company's logo and his personal call sign painted on the door. Jake pulled into the lot and parked precisely beside what appeared to be his own vehicle. The duplicate truck was identical in every single detail. The same distinctive scratches on the bumper, the same unique mud pattern on the tires, even the same small dent in the passenger door from a minor incident 3 years earlier. The trailer bore the identical load number and destination information displayed on his own equipment, but the cab was unsettlingly empty. No driver was visible behind the darkened windshield. Jake climbed out of his truck and slowly approached the duplicate vehicle, his breath clearly visible in the cold mountain air. The truck appeared solid and undeniably real, casting clear shadows under the parking lot lights and reflecting his own image in its polished chrome surfaces. He placed his hand on the hood and felt the warmth of an engine that had been running very recently. The fuel tank showed the exact same level as his own truck, and when he peered through the driver's side window, he saw his own logbook lying open on the passenger seat, filled with entries in his own distinctive handwriting, meticulously documenting the same impossible journey he was currently experiencing. Panic began to set in as Jake suddenly realized he was trapped in some form of temporal or spatial anomaly that utterly defied any rational explanation. He attempted calling his dispatcher on his cell phone, but the call went directly to voicemail despite showing full signal strength. Text messages inexplicably failed to send, and his internet connection, while showing as active, would not load any websites or applications. He was completely isolated within a bizarre bubble of unreality, cut off from the normal flow of time and space. Jake returned to his truck and continued driving, desperately hoping that forward motion might somehow break whatever unseen force was holding him captive in this recursive nightmare. He drove with mechanical precision, maintaining exact speed and direction, while meticulously documenting every single repetition of the familiar landmarks. Each loop took precisely 20 minutes and covered exactly 20.7 miles, bringing him back to Rocky Ford with the mathematical precision of a finely tuned clock mechanism. On his fourth passage through town, Jake noticed that the clock on the diner's exterior sign was inexplicably running backwards, its hands moving counterclockwise at a normal speed. The radio in his truck began picking up broadcasts from decades past: 1970s country music, news reports about events from the 1980s, weather forecasts for dates that had already occurred. Time itself seemed to be flowing in reverse within the boundaries of his endless loop, as if he had been caught in some kind of temporal whirlpool that recycled the same moments over and over again. By his sixth repetition, Jake began encountering other versions of himself. He would see his truck approaching from the opposite direction, driven by a figure that looked exactly like him, but who never acknowledged his presence. Sometimes he would pass multiple duplicate trucks, a bewildering convoy of Jake Morrisons, all seemingly trapped in the same impossible journey, all apparently unaware of each other's existence. The sight of his own face behind, the wheel of another truck staring straight ahead, with the blank expression of someone caught in highway hypnosis, filled him with an existential terror that threatened to completely overwhelm his ability to think rationally. Jake desperately tried breaking the pattern by stopping completely, turning around, taking different routes through Rocky Ford, and even abandoning his truck and walking along the highway. Nothing worked. Every single attempt to deviate from the established loop would somehow result in his returning to his truck and finding himself back on US Highway 50, approaching the identical landmarks in the same precise sequence. The universe seemed stubbornly determined to keep him locked in this 20-minute segment of highway, like a record player perpetually stuck on the same groove. As the night interminably wore on, Jake began to comprehend that he was not merely trapped in space, but irrevocably caught in a recursive loop of time itself. Each repetition was not just a return to the same physical location, but a return to the identical moment, playing out the same exact sequence of events, with only his growing awareness marking any difference between iterations. He was experiencing the same 20 minutes over and over, continually accumulating memories and knowledge, while the world around him inexplicably reset to its initial state. The fuel gauge on his truck remained mysteriously consistent despite hours of continuous driving, According to his calculations, he should have run out of diesel before his third loop. But the tank level never changed from the 3/4 full reading it had shown when the anomaly first began. Time was not affecting his truck in the normal way, as if the entire system of cause and effect had been somehow suspended within the boundaries of his temporal prison. At exactly 3:33 a.m., on Jake's 17th repetition of the loop, he made a desperate, crucial decision. Instead of continuing to drive forward in the futile hope of breaking free, he brought his truck to a complete stop directly in the middle of US Highway 50 and deliberately turned off the engine. He sat in absolute silence for the very first time since entering the anomaly, listening only to the faint tick of cooling metal and the gentle whisper of wind through his partially open window. The world around him seemed to hold its breath. The familiar sounds of his diesel engine, the steady hum of tires on asphalt, the background noise of his CB radio all fell completely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat pounding rhythmically in his ears and the shallow rhythm of his breathing in the enclosed space of his cab. He waited, counting seconds and then minutes, determined to remain utterly motionless until something fundamentally changed or until he somehow understood the true nature of his imprisonment. At exactly 3:33 a.m., something profoundly shifted. The oppressive sense of repetition and recycling that had defined his night suddenly lifted like a tremendous weight being removed from his chest. Jake felt reality snap abruptly back into its normal configuration, and when he looked at his GPS display, it clearly showed his location as mile marker 423 on US Highway 50, 17 miles past Rocky Ford, and precisely where he should have been if he had been driving normally for the past 4 hours. Jake started his engine and continued toward Denver, his hands still trembling from the deeply unsettling experience. His fuel gauge now showed the expected consumption for the distance he had traveled, and his CB radio picked up normal traffic from other drivers making their morning runs. The world had returned to its familiar patterns of cause and effect. But Jake carried with him the indelible memory of those impossible hours when time itself had become unstuck. When Jake finally reached his destination in Denver, he found that his delivery was exactly on schedule, despite his subjective experience of being trapped for over 4 hours. According to every clock, GPS system, and logbook entry, his journey from Pueblo had taken the normal amount of time, with no unexplained delays or detours. The only enduring evidence of his ordeal was his own memory and the photographs he had taken of his GPS display during the loops. Images that now showed normal readings with no trace whatsoever of the anomalous coordinates he had meticulously documented. Jake filed a report with his company about experiencing navigation difficulties near Rocky Ford, but he never fully explained what had truly happened to him on US Highway 50. He continued driving the same route for several more months, but each time he approached Rocky Ford, he would grip his steering wheel a little tighter and watch his clocks more carefully, perpetually remembering the night when time itself had trapped him in an endless, recursive repetition of the same 20 minutes. Other drivers began reporting remarkably similar experiences on the same stretch of highway: inexplicable missing time, repeated landmarks, and the distinct sensation of driving in circles despite maintaining a straight course. The Colorado Department of Transportation eventually acknowledged receiving multiple reports of navigation anomalies near Rocky Ford, though they attributed the incidents to GPS interference from nearby military installations, rather than admitting the unsettling possibility that US Highway 50 contained a genuine temporal anomaly. Jake Morrison never experienced another loop, but he never forgot the profound terror of being trapped in time's recursive grip, forever driving the same stretch of haunted highway, while reality inexplicably recycled around him like a broken record that stubbornly refused to move to the next song. Story 3. Breaker 19. Anyone else seeing this convoy ahead? Those were the words that crackled unexpectedly through Linda Washington's CB radio at 3:17 a.m. on Interstate 40, somewhere between Gallup and Grants, New Mexico. The voice belonged to a driver she had never heard before, tinged with an accent that sounded as if it originated from another bygone decade. Linda meticulously checked her mirrors and scanned the dark highway ahead, seeing nothing but empty asphalt stretching toward the distant mountains under a vast canopy of stars that seemed unusually bright that particular November night. Linda Washington, at 28 years old, proudly represented the second generation of Washington family truckers. Her father had driven these exact same southwestern routes in the 1970s and 1980s, often sharing captivating stories of the old days when CB radios were the only reliable connection between drivers, and the highway felt considerably more dangerous and mysterious than it did in the modern era of ubiquitous GPS tracking and instantaneous satellite communication. As a Cherokee woman who had grown up listening intently to her grandmother's profound stories about spirits that traversed the ancient paths, Linda maintained a deep, respectful awareness of forces that most drivers simply dismissed as mere superstition or products of an overactive imagination. Her 2017 Freightliner Cascadia was comprehensively equipped with every modern convenience and safety system available, from advanced collision avoidance technology to electronic logging devices that precisely tracked her every movement for strict regulatory compliance. The truck represented the pinnacle of contemporary engineering, meticulously designed to eliminate the inherent uncertainties and dangers that had transformed her father's generation of drivers into both folk heroes and cautionary tales. But on this specific night, traveling through the very heart of Navajo Nation territory on a route that eerily paralleled ancient trading paths used by indigenous peoples for thousands of years, Linda would discover that some roads profoundly remember their history in ways that no amount of modern technology can ever truly override. The run from Phoenix to Oklahoma City was routine work, a familiar freight route she had successfully completed dozens of times over her 3 years as an owner-operator. Her trailer carried valuable consumer electronics destined for distribution centers in the Midwest, a significant cargo that demanded careful attention to schedules and stringent security protocols. Linda took immense pride in maintaining the cultural traditions her grandmother had so lovingly taught her, even while fully embracing the technological demands of modern trucking. She carried sacred sage and sweetgrass in her cab, offered respectful tobacco to the spirits at certain sacred sites, and always acknowledged the land she traveled through as the traditional territory of the tribes who had called it home for countless centuries. At 3:23 a.m., Linda crested a long rise in the highway and saw them, a distinct line of taillights stretching across the horizon like an eerie procession of red stars falling to earth. The convoy appeared to consist of at least 20 vehicles, their lights forming a perfect synchronized procession, moving westbound in the distance. What immediately struck Linda as profoundly unusual was the spacing between the trucks, much closer together than modern safety regulations would ever permit, and the uncanny uniformity of their light patterns, strongly suggesting vehicles from an earlier era, when lighting configurations were markedly different from current standards. Linda reached for her CB radio to respond to the earlier transmission. Breaker 19, this is Cherokee Rose westbound on I-40 near mile marker 120. I can confirm visual on that convoy you mentioned. You still got eyes on them. The radio crackled with static for several seconds before the same voice responded, clearer now, but carrying an odd quality that seemed to echo slightly, as if the transmission were bouncing off distant mountains. Roger that, Cherokee Rose. They are running hard, maybe 75, 80 miles per hour. Never seen anything like it. They're not responding to radio calls, and I cannot make out any company markings on their trailers. The voice paused, and Linda could distinctly hear what sounded like wind rushing through the transmission. There is something else, Cherokee Rose. They are running without any running lights, just tail lights. No marker lights, no clearance lights, like they are desperately trying to stay invisible. As Linda maintained her position on the highway, gradually closing the distance to the mysterious convoy, she began to notice specific details that profoundly challenged her understanding of what she was witnessing. The trucks ahead appeared to be models from the 1950s or early 1960s, their distinctive shapes and proportions clearly visible in her headlights when she occasionally gained ground on the formation. The trailers were noticeably shorter and narrower than modern equipment, and she could clearly discern the characteristic rounded edges and prominent chrome details that unmistakably marked vehicles from a bygone era of American trucking. Her CB radio began picking up multiple voices, all seemingly part of the convoy's enigmatic communication network. The chatter was unlike anything Linda had ever heard on contemporary CB frequencies. The drivers used terminology and 10 codes that distinctly predated current standards, referring to locations by names that had not been used for decades. They spoke of fuel stops and truck stops that Linda knew had been permanently closed or demolished years earlier, discussing routes and schedules with the casual familiarity of drivers who had traversed these roads many times before. Breaker for the Shadow Fleet. This is Desert Ghost running drag. We got company behind us. Cherokee Rose, in a white Freightliner. Should we make room for her to pass? The transmission came through so clearly that Linda could distinctly hear the characteristic sound of an older diesel engine in the background, along with pervasive wind noise that suggested open windows despite the cold November air. Linda felt an undeniable chill run down her spine at the reference to Shadow Fleet, a term she had never encountered in contemporary trucking circles, but which carried profoundly ominous connotations. Her grandmother's stories came flooding back, tales of spirit travelers who moved between worlds, sometimes visible to the living and sometimes not, always traversing ancient paths that connected sacred sites and places of immense power. Interstate 40 had been constructed over significant portions of historic Route 66, which itself had followed even older trade routes and pathways that indigenous peoples had utilized for countless generations. "This is Cherokee Rose to Desert Ghost," Linda transmitted, her voice remaining steady despite the growing unease she profoundly felt. "I am not looking to pass, just maintaining my schedule. Are you all running a special convoy tonight?" The question hung in the air for nearly a minute before Desert Ghost responded, his voice now carrying a distinct note of sadness that seemed to emanate from decades of profound weariness. "We are always running, Cherokee Rose. Been running the same route since 1952, trying to finish what we started. Some races never truly end, even when all the drivers are gone." The transmission faded into static, leaving Linda with far more questions than answers, and a growing, unsettling realization that she was witnessing something that existed entirely outside the normal boundaries of space and time. Linda activated her truck's dash camera and began meticulously documenting what she was seeing, narrating her observations for later review. The convoy maintained its formation with mathematical precision, each truck positioned at exactly the same distance from the vehicles ahead and behind. Their speeds synchronized to a degree that suggested either supernatural coordination or a level of driving skill that bordered on the impossible. As she watched, the lead trucks began to navigate curves and grades, with movements that seemed meticulously choreographed, as if they were all responding to the same invisible conductor. Her subsequent research into New Mexico trucking history during a rest break later that night would chillingly reveal the tragic backstory that gave the Shadow Fleet its ominous name and enduring purpose. In 1952, a convoy of independent truckers had audaciously attempted to set a speed record for crossing New Mexico, racing from the Arizona border to the Texas line in a highly publicized stunt designed to promote a new freight company. The convoy consisted of 21 trucks, all expertly driven by experienced drivers who genuinely believed their skill and preparation would allow them to safely maintain dangerous speeds across the unforgiving desert highways. The race had ended in catastrophic disaster near the precise location where Linda encountered the Phantom convoy. A tragic combination of mechanical failures, acute driver fatigue, and treacherous road conditions had resulted in a devastating multi-vehicle accident that claimed the lives of 13 drivers and utterly destroyed most of the participating trucks. The survivors had never spoken publicly about what horrifyingly happened that night, and the freight company had dissolved within months of the tragedy, its reputation completely destroyed by the intense negative publicity surrounding the deaths. But the spirits of those lost drivers had apparently never stopped racing. Local tribal elders whom Linda contacted confirmed that the area had a long documented history of supernatural encounters, with travelers consistently reporting ghost lights, phantom vehicles, and the eerie sounds of engines and CB radio chatter emanating from empty highways. The Navajo Nation had recorded remarkably similar stories extending back to the early days of automobile travel, strongly suggesting that certain stretches of road retained the memories and profound emotions of those who had died violently while traversing their territory. As Linda continued to intently observe the convoy, she began to notice that the trucks appeared to be aging in reverse, their condition gradually improving, as if time itself were moving backward for them. Chrome that had initially appeared tarnished began to gleam. Paint that had looked faded began to shine with renewed vibrancy, and mechanical sounds that had seemed rough and worn became smoother and noticeably more powerful. It was as if the convoy was moving not just through physical space, but through the very fabric of time, steadily heading back toward the moment when they had been brand new trucks with living drivers, passionately pursuing dreams of success and widespread recognition. The CB chatter became more intense as the night progressed, with the Phantom drivers discussing intricate details of their planned route, precise fuel consumption calculations, and critical strategic decisions about when to push their speeds and when to exercise extreme caution. Linda suddenly realized she was listening to conversations that had originally taken place over 70 years earlier, replayed endlessly as the drivers desperately attempted to complete their tragically interrupted journey. The voices carried the distinct confidence and palpable optimism of men who genuinely believed they were making history, utterly unaware that their fateful race would ultimately end in profound tragedy. "Cherokee Rose, this is Desert Ghost again. We are approaching the crossing point soon. If you wish to honor the old ways, now would be the opportune time to show respect." The transmission was accompanied by coordinates that Linda instantly recognized as a sacred site her grandmother had told her about, a place where multiple ancient trails intersected and where offerings should traditionally be made to ensure safe travel. Linda pulled over at the next wide spot and reverently retrieved the sage and tobacco she carried for such sacred occasions. Following the precise protocols her grandmother had meticulously taught her, she made a heartfelt offering to the spirits of the lost drivers, acknowledging their profound sacrifice and respectfully asking for their enduring protection of all who traveled the inherently dangerous highways of the American Southwest. As she completed the solemn ceremony, the convoy gradually faded from view, their taillights becoming dimmer and more distant until they completely merged with the stars and disappeared entirely. The CB radio fell silent save for the occasional transmission from living drivers making their own late-night runs across the vast desert. Linda returned to her truck with a profound sense of having witnessed something both sacred and terrible, a glimpse into the enduring persistence of human will and ambition beyond the conventional boundaries of life and death. The Shadow Fleet would continue their eternal race, forever seeking to complete the journey that had cost them their lives, serving as both a powerful warning and a source of protection for other drivers who traversed the haunted highways of the American Southwest. Linda successfully completed her run to Oklahoma City without any further supernatural encounters, but she carried the indelible memory of the Shadow Fleet with her. As she returned to regular freight routes across the region, she began researching similar phenomena reported by other Native American drivers, discovering an intricate network of stories and shared experiences that powerfully suggested the highways of the Southwest were populated by far more than just living travelers. The roads profoundly remembered their dead, and sometimes on the darkest nights, when conditions were just right, the past would come rushing back to offer guidance, chilling warnings, and poignant reminders of the dangers that had always lurked on the very edges of America's vast transportation networks. The Cherokee Rose became a regular, esteemed contributor to a dedicated CB channel focused on supernatural encounters on southwestern highways, openly sharing her experience with the Shadow Fleet and learning invaluable insights from other drivers who had witnessed similar phenomena. Together, they formed an informal network of vigilant observers and protectors, people who understood that respectfully honoring the spirits of the road was just as critically important as meticulously maintaining their equipment and strictly adhering to safety regulations. Today, drivers traveling Interstate 40 through New Mexico still report unsettling encounters with vintage truck convoys that appear and disappear without conventional explanation. Their CB radios crackle, with voices from another era discussing routes, schedules, and dreams that tragically ended decades ago. The Shadow Fleet continues to race toward a finish line they will never reach, forever trapped in their final journey, but still offering guidance and protective oversight to the living drivers who share their eternal highway. Story 4. There was nothing wrong with Tommy Chen's odometer. The comprehensive inspection report filed by Apex Vehicle Solutions in Santa Fe on November 8, 2023, definitively confirmed that every system in his 2020 Peterbilt 389 functioned perfectly within manufacturer specifications. The digital odometer had been calibrated just 3 weeks earlier as part of his annual DOT inspection, its accuracy meticulously verified to within 1/10 of a mile across standardized test distances. Yet, according to the detailed maintenance logs Tommy meticulously kept, his truck had somehow gained an astounding 347 miles during what should have been a routine 89-mile run from Santa Fe to Roswell, New Mexico, along U.S. Highway 285 South. Tommy Chen had earned his mechanical engineering degree from UC Berkeley before the economic downturn of 2008 forced him to reconsider his career path. Trucking had initially been a temporary solution, merely a way to pay bills while actively searching for engineering work. But 15 years later, he had successfully built a thriving owner-operator business based entirely on his analytical approach to the industry. Where other drivers relied heavily on intuition and experience, Tommy utilized data and rigorous scientific methodology to meticulously optimize every single aspect of his operations. From precise fuel efficiency calculations to advanced route planning algorithms he had personally developed, his truck reflected this methodical mindset. The cab was comprehensively equipped with multiple GPS units for critical redundancy, electronic logging devices that recorded his exact position every minute, and a comprehensive array of monitoring equipment that tracked everything from tire pressure to engine temperature. Tommy maintained incredibly detailed spreadsheets documenting fuel consumption, maintenance schedules, and performance metrics that would have profoundly impressed his former engineering colleagues. He approached trucking as a science, firmly believing that enough data and careful analysis could utterly eliminate uncertainty and risk from even the most unpredictable profession. That November night began with Tommy's standard pre-trip inspection checklist, a rigorous 47-point examination that he conducted religiously before every single departure. His trailer contained delicate precision laboratory equipment destined for the National Radio Astronomy Observatory in Socorro, cargo that demanded climate control and vibration monitoring throughout the entire journey. The route along US Highway 285 was straightforward, a well-maintained highway that cut directly south through the high desert country of central New Mexico, passing through small communities like Lamy, Galisteo, and Vaughn, before ultimately reaching its destination. At 10:47 p.m., Tommy departed the Santa Fe terminal with his odometer reading exactly 847,329.7 miles, a precise figure he meticulously recorded in his logbook along with fuel levels, tire pressures, and prevailing weather conditions. His GPS unit showed the standard route south on US Highway 285 with an estimated travel time of 2 hours and 12 minutes to reach the observatory facilities. The first distinct sign that something was profoundly wrong came at 11:23 p.m. when Tommy passed mile marker 347 heading south. According to his GPS calculations and previous extensive experience, he should have encountered mile marker 341 at that point in his journey, having traveled approximately 36 miles from Santa Fe. Tommy pulled over to carefully check his GPS units, instinctively assuming one of them had malfunctioned or inexplicably lost its satellite signal. All three devices, however, showed consistent readings, placing him precisely at the correct coordinates for mile marker 347 on US Highway 285 South. But the mathematics simply did not add up to his known starting point and elapsed travel time. Tommy then consulted his detailed road atlas, a habit that had reliably served him well during GPS failures and construction detours throughout his entire career. The atlas definitively confirmed that mile markers on US Highway 285 should indeed decrease as he traveled south from Santa Fe, with the numbering system originating from the Colorado border and counting down toward the Texas line. Yet the physical mile marker he had just passed clearly displayed 347 in standard Department of Transportation font and format, exactly matching the appearance of legitimate highway markers he had observed throughout his career. Assuming he had somehow misread the marker in the darkness, Tommy continued south while paying considerably closer attention to the numbering sequence. At 11:31 p.m., he passed mile marker 348. 8 minutes later, he encountered mile marker 349. The mile markers were inexplicably counting upward rather than downward, strongly suggesting he was traveling north despite maintaining a consistent southerly heading according to his compass and GPS units. Tommy stopped his truck at the next wide spot on the shoulder and conducted a systematic check of all his navigation equipment. His magnetic compass pointed steadily south, a direction flawlessly confirmed by a digital compass app on his smartphone that utilized the device's internal magnetometer. His 3 GPS units showed consistent coordinates, indicating southbound travel on U.S. Highway 285, with his position tracking steadily toward his destination in Socorro. The stars visible through his windshield maintained their expected positions relative to his direction of travel, further confirming that he was indeed heading south across the vast New Mexico landscape. Yet, the mile markers stubbornly continued to count in the wrong direction. Tommy reached for his CB radio to contact other drivers who might be traveling the same perplexing route. Breaker 19. This is Pacific Engineer southbound on Highway 285 near mile marker 350. Can anyone confirm the mile marker sequence on this highway? I am seeing numbers that do not match my expectations. The radio crackled with static before a voice responded, though the quality was oddly distorted, as if the transmission were coming from a great distance or through significant atmospheric interference. Pacific Engineer, this is Desert Scholar. I have been traveling Highway 285 for 37 years, and I have never seen mile markers behave the way they are tonight. They're counting backwards from where I started, even though I'm traveling in the same direction I always have. The voice carried a distinct note of confusion that Tommy found both reassuring and profoundly disturbing. At least he was not the only driver experiencing these unsettling navigational anomalies. As Tommy continued south, the mile marker sequence became increasingly surreal. He passed marker 351, then 352, then 353, each one confirming that distance was somehow being measured in reverse of its normal progression. More disturbing still was the gradual, subtle change in his surroundings. The landscape outside his windows began to shift subtly, as if he were traveling not just through physical space, but through the very fabric of time. Modern road construction gradually gave way to older asphalt and concrete. Highway signs displayed fonts and designs from previous decades, and the few buildings visible in the distance appeared to be aging backward, their architecture becoming distinctly more contemporary as he progressed. Tommy activated his truck's dash camera system and began meticulously documenting the anomaly, narrating his observations for later analysis. Time is 11:47 p.m., odometer reading 847,365.4 miles, approximately 36 miles from starting point, but mile markers indicate position 354 and continuing to increase. GPS coordinates remain consistent with southbound travel on correct highway, but physical evidence strongly suggests movement through temporal as well as spatial dimensions. His radio began picking up broadcasts that seemed to originate from distinctly different time periods. Music from the 1960s and 1970s mixed with news reports about events Tommy clearly remembered from his childhood, weather forecasts for dates that had already occurred, and traffic reports for highway conditions from decades in the past. The voices sounded remarkably authentic rather than nostalgic recreations, carrying the casual immediacy of live broadcasts rather than archived recordings. At mile marker 359, Tommy encountered something that fundamentally challenged his entire scientific worldview. Another truck approached from the opposite direction, heading north toward Santa Fe. As the vehicle passed under his headlights, Tommy instantly recognized the exact specifications and appearance of his own Peterbilt 389, down to the distinctive paint scheme and company logos he had personally chosen for his business identity. Behind the wheel sat a figure that looked exactly like Tommy himself, but noticeably younger, wearing clothing styles from several years earlier and displaying the confident expression of someone who had not yet encountered the impossible. The encounter lasted only seconds, but Tommy caught a fleeting glimpse of the other driver's logbook lying open on the passenger seat. The pages appeared to contain entries in his own handwriting, documenting trips and destinations from earlier in his career when he had been meticulously establishing his business and learning the intricate nuances of long-haul trucking. It was as if he had passed a younger version of himself, traveling the same highway during an earlier period of his own life. Tommy immediately grabbed his CB radio. "Desert Scholar, this is Pacific Engineer. Did you see that northbound Peterbilt that just passed me? It looked exactly like my truck, driven by someone who looked exactly like me." The response came quickly, tinged with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Pacific Engineer, I have been seeing multiple versions of my own truck tonight, all traveling in different directions at different points along this highway. Each one represents a different period of my career, like photographs from my past spread out across the road. I think we are traveling through time as well as distance." As the night inexorably progressed, Tommy began to understand that US Highway 285 had somehow become unstuck from normal temporal progression. The backward-counting mile markers were not just indicating reverse distance measurement, but literal reverse time flow, taking him deeper into his own past with each mile traveled. His truck systems continued to function normally within their local framework, but the highway itself existed in a state of temporal flux that allowed past, present, and future to bizarrely coexist in the same physical space. Tommy encountered multiple versions of himself throughout the night, each representing a different stage of his trucking career. He saw himself as a nervous rookie learning to handle treacherous mountain grades, as a confident mid-career driver optimizing routes and building strong customer relationships, and at various intermediate points in his professional development. Each encounter provided fleeting glimpses into decisions he had made, challenges he had overcome, and the gradual evolution of his methodical approach to the trucking industry. The radio chatter became a bewildering cacophony of voices from distinctly different eras, with drivers from the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and beyond, all communicating simultaneously across the temporal boundaries that normally separated their experiences. Tommy listened to conversations about fuel prices from decades past, discussions of regulations that had long since been repealed or significantly modified, and debates about technology that was now utterly obsolete. It was as if US Highway 285 had become a comprehensive repository for every single conversation, every journey, and every moment that had ever occurred on its entire length. At mile marker 381, Tommy made a crucial decision. Instead of continuing to travel backward through time, he brought his truck to a complete stop and began conducting systematic measurements of his perplexing situation. He utilized his extensive engineering training to meticulously document the temporal anomaly with scientific precision, recording coordinates, timestamps, atmospheric conditions, and equipment readings that might help to explain how a stretch of highway could possibly violate the fundamental laws of physics. Tommy's measurements revealed that time was not flowing at a consistent rate throughout the affected area. His digital clocks ran at different speeds depending on his exact position on the highway, sometimes faster and sometimes slower than normal temporal progression. The odometer's backward counting was not a malfunction, but an accurate representation of movement through reverse time, truly measuring distance traveled into the past rather than toward a geographic destination. The most significant discovery came when Tommy realized that the temporal distortion was primarily centered on a specific coordinate approximately 15 miles south of Santa Fe, near the site of a major traffic accident that had occurred in 1987. According to newspaper archives he later accessed, a devastating collision between multiple vehicles, including several trucks, had resulted in numerous fatalities and had subsequently led to significant changes in highway design and critical safety protocols. The accident had been largely blamed on a combination of factors, including driver fatigue, inadequate lighting, and confusing mile marker placement that had been corrected in subsequent road improvements. Tommy theorized that the temporal anomaly represented a kind of temporal scar, a place where traumatic events had damaged the normal flow of time and created a recursive loop that trapped unsuspecting travelers in cycles of past experience. The backward mile markers and time distortion were not random phenomena, but were precisely centered on the anniversary date of the original accident, creating conditions that allowed past and present to bizarrely overlap in dangerous ways. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the very same time that the 1987 accident had occurred, Tommy felt reality suddenly shift around him. The temporal distortion abruptly collapsed, and normal time flow immediately resumed. His odometer jumped forward to show the correct mileage for his actual location. His GPS unit synchronized with his physical position, and the mile markers began counting in the proper forward direction. The radio chatter from previous decades completely faded away, replaced by normal traffic from contemporary drivers making their own late-night runs across New Mexico. Tommy successfully completed his delivery to the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, but he never forgot his surreal journey through time on U.S. Highway 285. He filed detailed reports with the New Mexico Department of Transportation and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, though his scientific documentation was unfortunately dismissed as mere driver fatigue and equipment malfunction. Despite the precision of his measurements and the remarkable consistency of his data, other drivers began reporting remarkably similar experiences on the same stretch of highway, particularly during the anniversary period of the original 1987 accident. The reports consistently followed distinct patterns: backward counting mile markers, radio broadcasts from previous decades, unsettling encounters with younger versions of themselves, and temporal distortion that profoundly challenged conventional understanding of highway travel. The New Mexico Department of Transportation eventually acknowledged receiving multiple reports of navigation anomalies near mile marker 347, though they attributed the incidents to GPS interference and optical illusions, rather than admitting the unsettling possibility of temporal distortion. Tommy Chen continued his trucking career, but never again traveled U.S. Highway 285 during the anniversary period of the accident that had created its temporal anomaly. He shared his unique experience with other drivers through trucking forums and CB radio networks, warning them about the inherent dangers of getting trapped in the highway's recursive time loop. His engineering background allowed him to develop sophisticated theories about how traumatic events might create lasting distortions in the very fabric of space-time, particularly in locations where multiple transportation routes intersected and concentrated the flow of human activity and profound emotion. The stretch of U.S. Highway 285 near mile marker 347 became famously known among experienced drivers as the backwards mile, a place where time itself could inexplicably reverse direction and trap unwary travelers in bewildering loops of their own past experiences. Drivers learned to pay careful attention to mile marker sequences and to be fully prepared for the unsettling possibility that some highways profoundly remembered their history in ways that utterly defied conventional physics and challenged the fundamental assumptions about the nature of time and space. Today, Tommy Chen continues to approach trucking with his signature scientific methodology, but he has profoundly expanded his understanding to include phenomena that exist entirely beyond the conventional boundaries of engineering. He maintains detailed documentation of temporal anomalies reported throughout the trucking industry, diligently hoping to develop a comprehensive theory that might explain how America's highways serve not just as transportation corridors, but as profound repositories of memory, emotion, and experience that can sometimes inexplicably spill over into the normal flow of time. His journey through the backwards mile definitively taught him that the road holds far more mysteries than any amount of data analysis could ever fully explain. Story 5. David Park was reported overdue on a route he had meticulously driven 200 times. The dispatcher at Summit Transport Logistics had expected his check-in call by 6:30 a.m., but the unsettling silence from his regular Denver to Salt Lake City run stretched interminably through the morning hours without any explanation. David's 2021 Freightliner Cascadia was comprehensively equipped with multiple tracking systems, satellite communication devices, and emergency beacons that should have made prolonged communication blackouts utterly impossible. Yet, according to every electronic monitoring system his company employed, David Park and his truck had simply vanished somewhere along Interstate 70 in eastern Utah during the early morning hours of December 15, 2023. At 38 years old, David Park perfectly embodied the modern professional truck driver. His safety record was absolutely immaculate across 12 years of long-haul trucking, with not a single preventable accident, moving violation, or late delivery marking his entire employment history. He was a devoted family man who called his wife Sarah every single evening at exactly 8 p.m., regardless of his geographical location, a cherished ritual that had remained unbroken throughout his career until the night he inexplicably disappeared. His route planning was meticulously methodical and highly conservative, always building in extra time into his schedules to account for adverse weather, heavy traffic, or unforeseen mechanical issues that might arise during cross-country hauls. The Denver to Salt Lake City run represented David's primary freight corridor, a route he had completely mastered through countless repetitions and careful attention to every mile of highway, every truck stop, and every potential hazard along the 525-mile journey. Interstate 70 through Utah was as intimately familiar to him as his own neighborhood streets. From the dramatic ascent through the Rocky Mountains to the long descent into the high desert country surrounding Grand Junction, Colorado, and finally the straight run across Utah's red rock landscape toward the Wasatch Mountains. That December night had commenced like hundreds of others. David departed the Denver terminal at 11:15 p.m. with his trailer heavily loaded with consumer electronics destined for distribution centers in Salt Lake City. Weather conditions were ideal, with clear skies and temperatures well above freezing throughout the entire corridor. His pre-trip inspection revealed no mechanical issues. His fuel tanks were completely full, and his electronic logging device showed him well within hours of service regulations, with plenty of driving time available to comfortably complete the journey. David's first indication that something was wrong came at 2:47 a.m. as he approached the small town of Green River, Utah. The green highway signs that should have announced the upcoming exit began displaying completely different information than he expected. Instead of showing Green River next 3 exits, as he had seen hundreds of times before, the signs inexplicably read Goblin Valley State Park, 37 miles, and Capitol Reef National Park, 89 miles. Destinations that were located on entirely different highways south of his intended route. Initially attributing the discrepancy to recent sign updates or his own fatigue-induced misreading, David continued west on what his GPS confirmed was Interstate 70. But the exits that subsequently appeared did not match his memory or his road atlas. Where he expected to find the familiar Green River truck stop, he encountered an exit for Moonstone Beach Recreation Area, a destination he had never heard of, despite his extensive knowledge of Utah's highway system. David activated his CB radio to contact other drivers who might be traveling the same route.
Breaker 119, this is Mountain Runner westbound on I-70 near Green River. Can anyone confirm the current exit information? I am seeing signs for locations that do not match my atlas. The radio remained unsettlingly silent except for static, highly unusual for a major interstate highway that typically carried steady traffic throughout the night hours. His cell phone showed full signal strength, but could not complete calls to his dispatcher or his wife. Text messages failed to send despite multiple attempts, and his truck's satellite communication system reported no signal available, despite clear skies that should have provided optimal reception conditions. David was becoming increasingly isolated from the outside world, completely cut off from the communication networks that connected modern truckers to their support systems and critical safety resources. As David continued west, the highway began to change in subtle, disconcerting ways that fundamentally challenged his understanding of the route he knew so well. The familiar landmarks disappeared, replaced by rock formations and landscape features he simply did not recognize. The highway itself seemed to be subtly steering him away from his intended path with gentle curves that gradually altered his heading without his conscious awareness. When he tried to maintain a straight westerly course, the road itself seemed to actively resist his efforts, creating optical illusions that made straight sections appear curved and forcing him to passively follow the pavement's lead. David's GPS units began displaying contradictory information. One showed him traveling northwest toward an area labeled Fossil Butte National Monument, while another indicated he was heading southwest toward Zion National Park. The third GPS unit showed no position data at all, its screen displaying only a chilling message that read, "Location services unavailable. Please consult local maps." Yet all three devices had been functioning perfectly when he departed Denver, and their satellite reception indicators showed strong signals from multiple satellites. The fuel gauge on David's truck became another source of profound confusion and growing alarm. Despite having filled his tanks in Grand Junction and driving for less than 2 hours since his last fuel stop, the gauge showed his reserves dropping at an impossible rate. According to his calculations, he should have had at least 150 gallons remaining, enough fuel for another 600 miles of travel. Yet, the digital display indicated only 47 gallons in his tanks, suggesting consumption rates that would have indicated major engine problems or significant fuel leaks that his monitoring systems should have detected. David pulled over at the next exit to investigate the fuel discrepancy. But the exit ramp led not to a truck stop or service area, but to a narrow dirt road that disappeared into impenetrable darkness beyond the range of his headlights. The exit sign had read, "Services, fuel, food, lodging," in standard interstate formatting, but the reality beyond the pavement was an unpaved track that looked as if it had not been maintained for decades. David returned to the highway, increasingly concerned about his desperate situation, but utterly unable to find logical explanations for the anomalies he was experiencing. As the night progressed, David realized that Interstate 70 was actively hunting him, manipulating road signs and exit ramps to lure him away from his intended route toward increasingly remote and dangerous destinations. The highway seemed to possess a malevolent intelligence that could alter its own configuration in real time, creating false exits that led nowhere and phantom destinations that existed solely to confuse and trap unwary travelers. David's truck began experiencing mechanical problems that had no apparent cause. His steering became increasingly difficult, as if invisible hands were actively wrestling for control of the wheel. The brakes would inexplicably engage randomly, forcing him to slow down at locations where the highway seemed to want him to stop and investigate suspicious exits or peculiar roadside features.
His cruise control activated itself and began accelerating beyond his set speed, as if the truck were being controlled by external forces that completely overrode his input commands. The most terrifying moment came when David's truck began driving itself completely. At 4:23 a.m., while he was desperately fighting to maintain control of his steering wheel, his hands were suddenly pushed away from the controls by an invisible force. The truck continued to accelerate and began taking an exit he had not chosen, following a ramp that led toward what appeared to be a vast canyon system filled with abandoned vehicles. David could clearly see dozens of cars, trucks, and RVs scattered throughout the canyon, their rusted hulks glinting eerily in his headlights like a vehicular graveyard. Some of the vehicles appeared recent, while others looked as if they had been there for decades, slowly being consumed by the relentless desert environment. He suddenly realized he was looking at the final destination of other travelers who had been lured off Interstate 70 by the highway's predatory intelligence, trapped in the canyon system and left to die of thirst and exposure, while their vehicles joined the growing collection of automotive bones. Fighting against the invisible control that was steering his truck towards the same horrifying fate, David made a desperate, crucial decision. He reached for his engine controls and shut off the diesel completely, bringing 18 tons of truck and trailer to a gradual stop through momentum alone. The supernatural force that had been controlling his vehicle seemed utterly unable to operate without engine power, and David felt the steering wheel return to his control as the truck finally came to rest on the shoulder of the exit ramp. David climbed down from his cab and began walking back toward the main highway, abandoning his truck rather than allowing himself to be driven into the automotive graveyard below. The walk back to Interstate 70 took nearly an hour, during which he encountered other abandoned vehicles along the roadside, their drivers' remains still visible in some cases, chillingly suggesting that the highway's predatory behavior had been claiming victims for decades. When David reached the main highway, he was profoundly surprised to find normal traffic flowing in both directions, with other truckers maintaining regular communication on CB Channel 19. The road signs displayed correct information for Interstate 70 West, and the familiar landmarks he knew so well had returned to their expected locations. His cell phone immediately began working normally, showing dozens of missed calls from his dispatcher and his wife, who had been frantically searching for him after he failed to make his scheduled check-in. David's rescue came when a Utah Highway Patrol trooper found him walking along the interstate near Green River at 6:45 a.m. The officer, Sergeant Martinez, had been part of search operations for missing travelers in the area and was intimately familiar with reports of vehicles and drivers disappearing along certain stretches of remote highway. David's truck was recovered later that morning from the canyon system, its fuel tanks mysteriously full despite his earlier readings showing near-empty reserves. The investigation into David's disappearance revealed dozens of remarkably similar incidents over the previous decade. The Utah Highway Patrol had meticulously documented multiple cases of drivers reporting mechanical malfunctions that forced them to take unplanned exits, GPS failures that led them to remote locations, and encounters with road signs that displayed false information about services and destinations. Most disturbing was the discovery of the vehicular graveyard that David had narrowly escaped, containing the remains of travelers dating back to the 1960s. Geological surveys of the area revealed unusual magnetic anomalies and mineral deposits that could potentially interfere with electronic equipment, providing a partial scientific explanation for the GPS and communication failures experienced by affected drivers. However, the supernatural aspects of David's experience, including the invisible force that had controlled his truck and the highway's apparent ability to alter its own configuration, remained utterly unexplained by conventional investigation methods. David Park returned to trucking after a brief leave of absence, but he never again traveled Interstate 70 through eastern Utah during the overnight hours, when the highway's predatory behavior was most active. He became a fervent advocate for increased safety measures in remote areas, actively supporting the installation of additional emergency communication systems and regular patrol coverage for stretches of highway where drivers were known to disappear. The Utah Department of Transportation eventually acknowledged the pattern of disappearances and implemented additional safety measures along the affected stretch of Interstate 70, including enhanced lighting, emergency call boxes, and regular monitoring of electronic traffic systems for anomalous readings. Warning signs were installed at travelers' oasis, rest stops, and rest areas, advising drivers to remain on main travel lanes and to report any unusual road signs or exit configurations to authorities immediately. Other truckers began sharing stories of remarkably similar encounters with predatory highways throughout the western United States, roads that seemed to actively hunt travelers and lure them away from safe routes toward remote areas where rescue was highly unlikely. The trucking community developed informal networks for sharing crucial information about dangerous stretches of highway, creating dedicated CB channels for reporting supernatural encounters and unusual mechanical problems that might indicate the presence of hostile road conditions. David's experience on the hungry highway of Interstate 70 served as a chilling reminder that America's transportation network contained more than just routes between cities. Some roads had developed their own malevolent intelligence, feeding on the vehicles and drivers who traveled their lonely stretches during the dark hours when normal traffic was light and rescue was far away. These highways had become predators in their own right, using the trust and familiarity that drivers developed for their routes as insidious weapons to lure them away from safety toward destinations from which few travelers ever returned. Today, experienced truckers know to be profoundly suspicious of road signs that do not match their expectations, exits that lead to unfamiliar destinations, and mechanical problems that occur only on specific stretches of remote highway. They understand that some roads are hungrier than others, and that surviving a career in long-haul trucking requires not just mechanical knowledge and safe driving practices, but also the crucial wisdom to recognize when the highway itself has become the enemy.